Welcome to Holistica, and welcome to the course, Getting Out of Our Own Way, Making Friends with Ego and Resistance on the Spiritual Path. I'm Joni Dietrich. I'm a psychologist and a teacher of yoga, Reiki, and meditation. And I've been on a spiritual path for a very long time. The path has been windy. It's been up and down. It's moved all around. There have been many barriers, many obstructions. Most of those resistances I liked to attribute to external factors. I didn't have time to get up in the morning and meditate when my children were young because I would have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning in order to do that. But, I was really good with all those excuses. And my guess is that, some of you are kind of good with your excuses too. And that we really do, even when we think that we are having outside obstacles and barriers to our practice, it's really how we're reacting to them within. Sometimes even just by giving in to them and saying, oh yes, I don't have time to practice. I don't have time to meditate. Well, when you've really had the opportunity to have an experience that's a glimpse into that great consciousness, into the absolute, into the divine. And I'm sure most of you have had that, or you wouldn't be taking this course right now. Once we have that, we begin to realize that there is nothing else that is more important. Now, that doesn't mean that we are going to renounce family and home and necessarily go into an ashram or a convent or a monastery. No, indeed, we have to figure out how to negotiate our lives so that we can both have our spiritual practice, so that we can be on our spiritual path and we can live our life. Maybe it's simpler to simply say, I don't have time for it. I'll do that when the kids are grown. I'll do that when I'm done with school. I'll do that when I retire. And yet we know when we have those glimpses that those are what truly feed us, that are what truly nurture us, and that is what can take us out into the world again in a way that is loving and giving and much more peaceful. And that actually, if we do take the time now to do our practices, to stay on our path, then we're going to be happier, and the people around us are going to be happier too. So what is this process inside of ourselves that kind of retracts, if you will, from doing those things that we feel like we should do on our spiritual path? Simple things like taking time out each day to meditate, to pray, to contemplate. Even simple things like making a choice or a decision. Today, I'm not going to yell at my kids. Making that, having that beautiful consciousness, getting in the car, driving them to school, realizing somebody forgot their lunch and somebody doesn't have their sweatshirt, and snapping. How is it that we do this, that we move back and forth from the highest intentions to acting human? Or, for example, in terms of having those glimpses into the universality. Maybe we're in California here. You go to the beach. It's absolutely a spectacular day. You feel like you're so connected with the sky, with the ocean. It's complete bliss. You get in your car, you get on Highway 1, somebody cuts you off, and suddenly you're blaring on the horn and you're screaming at the jerk. So what is it then that gets in our way of these great intentions, or that seems to not allow us to take what we have experienced and bring it out into the world? Well, part of what it is actually a structure that is inherent to each of us, and that is the egoic self. What is the ego? The ego is that part of our human consciousness that is self-protective and likes to define itself, likes to define us. I am defined as I'm a woman, I'm a teacher, I am Joni, I have these likes and I have these dislikes, and that's who I am. And in order to exist in the world, I need to assert who I am. I want a sense of stability. I don't want to be this way one moment and that way another moment. So I create this identity. And that's my egoic self that negotiates with the world, that is always scanning to make sure that I'm safe, that is concerned with I, me, and mine. And I want to make sure that my kids get into the best school. I want to make sure that I have the best house. I want to make sure that everything is all lined up for me to operate as I'd like to in the world. This is actually really natural. This is who we all are. And yet sometimes we can also have that sense of, yes, I am that. And at the same time, I feel a unity with other people. I want to be cooperative. I want to live interdependently. I don't want to live competitively. And so I've got to figure out, how is it that I pulsate back and forth between this? And what do I do about this egoic self that keeps nudging me into do this, do that, do this, and do these various things that are going to glorify me, that are going to keep me in this position of apparent power or control that I like to have. That's what the ego does. The ego, you see, is very self-protective. It's very conservative. It doesn't want to lose itself a sense of identity. And so it holds on to any kind of trappings that make it look good to others, that make it feel strong, even if it's temporary. But the ego also gets grasped, if you will, by things in the outside world. The ego has its attachments. It has its desires. It really functions a lot by looking at what's out there in the world, seeing what it needs to do to stay safe and stable, to avoid and resist change, to keep its own sense of identity, and then also to kind of get those things that it likes, So it's hard for the ego to say, oh no, let's really not have another cookie. Or, oh no, it's okay. I know that my kids are young and they probably really shouldn't watch this PG-13 movie, but I'm really tired and I just want to watch this movie. So it's okay. Tonight they can sit with me and watch it. And, if I need to, I'll put my hands over their eyes during parts of this movie. And so it's like we give in a lot to our impulses and our desires. And again, this is natural. But when we do this, often we feel terrible actually about ourselves. Then we start to chide ourselves. We're full of self-recriminations about, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Why did I do that? And that's ego talking to ego. My goodness, we certainly need to have those times when we can just bathe in that greater consciousness, because our ego consciousness actually can keep us very small, keep us within a very restricted, limited way of seeing the world and of behaving. And actually the ego is quite a limiter, if you will. So in spite of our best intentions, just like addicts, we all experience slippage from those intentions. One of the ways of looking at this is using a word from the Tibetan vocabulary. Pema Chodron speaks about shenpa. A shenpa is an attachment or a desire or a belief that kind of grabs us. And it pulls us away from whatever our great intention is. So when I was talking earlier about having this wonderful intention of being just the best mother ever, and then getting in the car and the kid annoys us and we snap. What grabbed us? What was that? And so for each of us, we need to recognize these things that grab us. And it happens so quickly. Pema Chodron describes it as it's like both an itch and scratching it at the same time. And you know how that is. It's like you get the itch and you scratch it unconsciously. And then afterwards you say, I shouldn't have scratched that. Right? Well, this is what we do. This is what the ego does to us too. It's like we give in to some kind of impulse, it can be a desire. It can be an impulse of like, oh, I'm not being treated right, so I'm angry and I'm going to express it, or they hurt my feelings and so I'm so insulted and now I'm mad and I won't speak to them. And we give in to that just almost immediately. One of the things we need to learn to do is to give these impulses a little bit of space, to give our shenpas a little bit of space to recognize them as we're going through daily life. Ooh, I was just grasped here. Oh, okay, I feel that. Oh, and I also just gave into it. And we need to be careful. We need to treat ourselves with self-compassion to not then have our ego lambast us for having given in. It's actually natural. This is what we do. We do want to learn to do something else so that we can feel a little bit more like we're living that spiritual life, like we're living in that bliss. Yeah. And these are things that we actually can work on. But we have to work on them lovingly. We have to work on them with self-forgiveness and self-compassion. And that's why I'm talking about how we need to make friends with our ego. Our ego really is about trying to make sure that we survive. This is a good thing. We need to survive. Our ego is that consciousness that is directed outward into the world and really trying to figure out what's safe to do, what's good to do, what's positive to do. And yes, it can embellish and say, well, I should have a mansion and you shouldn't. But we can work with the ego, right? The ego can work with itself. It is conscious of itself and it can think and it can make choices and we can begin to change. But we need to do that by actually being kind to ourselves and being forgiving to ourselves. So think about, just for a moment right now, just think about an incident that may have happened even today where you didn't exactly act the way you wish you had. You didn't react the way that you wish you had. And just take a moment and close your eyes and breathe into that, remembering. And see if you can play a little bit with time and space now. I mean, you're not actually back in that time. You're not actually back in that place. So in your imagination, imagine whatever it was that annoyed you, that irritated you. Imagine seeing that. Imagine having the bodily reaction that you did have to that. And now just offer that breath. Just give it a little space. And then, if in actuality, once you experience this, you then gave yourself a negative self-statement, something like, oh, I shouldn't have reacted that way. I do this all the time. I'll never learn. Something like that. Picture yourself giving yourself that negative self-statement and take another breath and give space to that negative self-statement. Just breathe into it. All we're doing is giving it space. You see, the beauty of giving space through breath is that's the place where the outward consciousness meets the inward flow of attention. The inward flow of attention takes us into our interior self, which is more rooted in the ground of being, you see. So as something as simple as that is a way to begin to make friends with your ego. There's a Sanskrit word, graha. Our grahas are something like shenpas. Shenpas are like these little attachments. It might be the attachment, like I said, to anger, irritation. It might be that, ooh, that ice cream is reaching out at me and grasping toward me. Okay, but the grahas are more about our identities, our roles in life, how we define ourselves by who I am. I am a teacher. I'm a mother. I'm a grandmother. I'm a homeowner. Whatever it is, whatever your occupation is, your volunteer work, those external roles. And we do define ourselves in so many ways by those external roles. If somebody asks you, who are you? Usually you're going to tell them what it is that you do or what your roles are, how that defines you. And, we like to put a little status on there and we like to make it look really good. We get very attached to our identities. I'll give you an example. I earned my Ph.D. in psychology back in 1984. And I was still youngish, and I was so very proud of it. I was so proud of getting that moniker of doctor that you better believe if I just called up to make reservations at a restaurant, this was Dr. Dietrich calling. Oh my goodness, it was so important. And I expected everyone to call me doctor. Well, when I had a client walk in and say, hello, Joan, I was insulted. It was like, do you not know who I am? That I am Dr. Joan Dietrich? Never for a moment pausing to think that maybe this person was just reaching out, making connection, trying to have a relationship, which actually as a therapist, that was my job. I was the one that was supposed to be making relationship, but I was holding myself at distance because of this graha, because of this identity. You might have a graha as a sports fan. This is how you identify yourself. So our identities also will grasp at us, and we find that we get self-righteous and we get competitive and we have all kinds of irritation around making sure that people see me the way that I'm trying to project myself. And we actually kind of get lost in those things, even though we think, the ego thinks, oh, I'm building a structure and I'm putting a sense of stability into what I am. Years later, I actually like it when people call me Joni. And maybe that's my new graha, my new identity. But I'd like you to think about that. What are these grahas? What are these things that also grab you? This sense of, I must see myself this way, and if I don't, I won't know who I am. They won't know who I am, but I won't know who I am. I have to define myself. And to just take a look at that. What are the definers in your life? So now I'm going to offer you a guided meditation. We've talked about the shenpas, those things that grab us, that grab our attention. And we've also talked about the grahas, the roles, the identities. What I'd like you to do is take a moment and just simply close your eyes and consider, what are those little addictions that hold me? What are those roles that define me? And I'd like you to pick just one of those. So it can be either a shenpa or a graha. And just hold that in your mind. Make sure you give it a name. So the name could be, in my case, psychologist, needing to be seen as doctor. Now, as you're holding it in your mind, give breath to it. And then ask yourself the question, what does this satisfy within me? And it doesn't matter if your answer comes in actual words or not. Just pose the question. How does this Shenpa, how does this Graha satisfy something within me? And then ask yourself the question, what if I released it? Notice what you feel. Is there a little twinge of fear? Is there some doubt? Are you questioning whether you could release it? Just breathe space into it. And then imagine that you are releasing it. And just let it melt down into the earth. When you release this, what remains? You see, there is the I that is defined by the ego. And then there is the I that is pure existence. Perhaps even for a moment, as you let this attachment release, as you just let it melt into the earth, perhaps there is just a moment of that pure I-ness, the pure isness of being. It's possible that as soon as you experience that some other graha or shenpa, some other thought will come and push that away gently. And that's all right. And take a moment again and simply breathe into the knowing that there is a place of pure being within. Very good. Take a deep inhalation and a deep exhalation. And know that this is a practice for you to engage in during the week. Each time you can pick a new attachment, maybe one that shows up during that day for you, and just let it melt. Notice it at first, don't push it away, just let it melt. And then breathe into the pure I-ness of your own being. So if you can do that every day this week, that would be great. We can dialogue about it on the discussion board. And so also take a little time to do some journaling and ask yourself, so what are my shenpas? What are those things that grasp me? What are my grahas? What are these identities that seem to form who I am? And then also what I'd like you to do is see if you can list those negative self-statements that we all do that come up whenever it is that we're trying to do something good and it's hard to do. So list those negative self-statements. We actually know in psychology that these are universal, that people are giving themselves negative self-statements all the time. We're not always that conscious of it. So if you're one of those persons who's it's not that obvious for you, work with it a little bit. See what you can do. It's pretty typical to feel unworthy or unable or incapable, and just know that. And then breathe into it, give it space, and offer self-forgiveness.